If you've come for tales of glory, lad, you're in the wrong place. This story's no anthem, it's a dirge. It's not about medals, though I wore one once before I pawned it for bread. It's not about victory either. We all lost something over there, even the ones who came back walking. Some lost limbs, others their minds.
Me? I lost the boy I used to be?
There's a truth the world seldom teaches, especially to the young and the eager. War doesn't make heroes, it unmakes men. It strips you of softness, of smiles, of sleep. And once you've breathed in the stench of rotten powder, once you've watched a friend's eyes roll back while his guts steam in the cold, you are never the same. But that's not the whole truth. Because even in hell there are lights, tiny trembling things that flicker but do not fail. This is a story about one such light. A woman, a nurse, a figure draped in lampglow and silence who moved through the dark halls of Scutari like a prayer given form. They called her Florence Nightingale. But to us she was more than a name. She was hope in a hopeless place. Not a saint, not a savior, but a human being who chose mercy when the rest of the world chose madness. Where bullets shredded men, she stitched hearts. Where fever killed, she comforted. Where death triumphed, she bore witness. And it is that lad, that witness, that matters most. Because no matter how war breaks you, no matter how deep the wound or how dark the trench, if there is one soul willing to kneel beside your suffering and see you, you are not entirely lost. Not yet, so listen close. This story is not about war's glory, but its cost. Not about battles, but the battlefield after. The long hours of pain and silence. And not about soldiers alone, but about the one woman who dared to stand among us as the world fell apart and say, "You are still human, and I am here." The air, thick and rancid, clung to the lungs like a shroud. It was a stew of things you could name. Gangrene, sweat, unwashed linens, cheap lamp oil, and 100 things you couldn't. The very essence of decay given form. This was Scutari, the fortress of our undoing. The final act in a play that began on the sun-scorched plains of Crimea. They called it the Barrack Hospital, but it was a barrack for the dying. A charnel house where the glory of queen and country came to rot. I was Private Thomas Croft of the 4th, the King's Own Regiment of Foot, a man who had seen the Russian bear up close and lived to tell the tale, albeit with a piece of my thigh gone and a fever that ran so hot. I often dreamt of winter snows melting on my skin. I had charged up that hellish slope at the Alma, a boy of 18 believing in the righteousness of our cause and the infallibility of the British line. I had seen the Light Brigade ride to their doom, a shimmering, terrible wave of steel and courage, and watched the Turkish gunners at Balaclava perform their own grim dance. But none of that, not the thunder of cannon or the shriek of shot, could have prepared me for this. War, they said, was the great crucible, the forge where men were hammered into heroes. What a bloody lie. War was the great dissolver, the solvent that stripped away everything, dignity, sanity, a man's very sense of himself. Here in this sprawling, God-forsaken building with its long, high-vaulted halls echoing with the symphony of suffering, we were not heroes. We were meat, raw, bleeding, shivering meat, laid out on pallets with our wounds open to the flies and the indifference of the world. The days bled into each other, marked not by sunrise and sunset, but by the arrival of a new batch of wounded. They would be carried in on stretchers, their faces a mask of white shock and gray pain, their uniforms stiff with dried blood and mud. We would watch them, the lucky ones who had been here longer, with a kind of grim, detached pity. We knew their fate. The lucky would die quickly, the unlucky would linger, their bodies racked with fever, their wounds turning foul, their cries becoming a familiar part of the night's chorus. My own injury was, by the standards of the place, a trifle. A Russian minié ball had torn a furrow through my thigh. It had bled a river, and the pain, a searing white-hot lance, had been an education in itself. But it was not the wound that was killing me, it was the fever. A relentless, soul-stealing fire that turned my blood to a torrent of molten lead and my bones to dust. My mind would drift, a little boat lost on a storm-tossed sea. I would see my mother's face, my sister's bright hair, the cobbled street of my hometown. Then the vision would snap, and I would be back in the stench and the gloom listening to the man next to me, a young corporal from the Scottish Highlanders, whispering for water until his voice gave out forever. The care we received at first was a mockery of the word. The orderlies were often drunk, the surgeons overworked and under-equipped. They would saw off limbs with a speed born of desperation, their hands a blur of blood and bone, and the screams. Oh, the screams. They were not the proud cries of men in battle, but the terrified pleas of men butchered alive. The amputees were tossed into a corner, their stumps wrapped in filthy rags to bleed out or not as God willed. The sheer colossal incompetence of it all was more horrifying than any Russian charge. We had survived the cannon, the rifle, the bayonet, only to be consumed by our own neglect. And then she came. I remember the day as if it were a photograph burned into my mind. The murmuring began first, a ripple of sound in the fetid stillness of the ward. "The new nurses," someone whispered. "The lady," another added, a kind of reverent fear in his voice. We had heard stories of her, of a fierce, unyielding woman who had arrived with a company of nurses, a direct order from the Queen herself. We had scoffed at the idea. Women in this charnel house? What could a woman, a gentlewoman at that, know of this horror? We had seen death in its most grotesque forms. We had stared into the abyss. We believed nothing could change it. I was wrong, utterly, profoundly wrong. She did not arrive in a flash of glory or a flurry of trumpets. Her arrival was a quiet, almost spectral thing. It was at night, always at night, when the gas lamps sputtered and cast long, dancing shadows, that she made her rounds. I was deep in the throes of fever, my body a furnace, my mind a kaleidoscope of waking nightmares. I saw a flicker of light in the distance, a small, steady flame moving down the long aisle of pallets. It grew closer, casting a gentle, golden glow that seemed to push back the shadows, not with force, but with a quiet, undeniable presence. And then I saw her. She was not a figure of great beauty in the conventional sense. Her face, framed by a plain cap, was serious, almost severe, with lines of fatigue etched around her eyes. But her eyes themselves, they were something else entirely. They were deep pools of compassion, a sorrowful, understanding ocean that seemed to hold all the suffering of the world within their depths. She was tall, her dark dress a simple, unadorned column against the gloom. In her hand she carried a small brass lamp, its light a beacon in the darkness. She was the lady with the lamp, and the name was not a fancy but a simple, profound truth. As she moved, there was no sound save for the soft rustle of her skirts and the whisper of her shoes on the stone floor. She did not speak, not at first. Her presence was enough. The light from her lamp would fall upon a soldier's face, revealing the hollows of his cheeks, the feverish sheen of his skin, the haunted look in his eyes. She would stop, and for a moment the world would hold its breath. She would bend over the man, her face close to his, and with a touch that was astonishingly gentle, she would feel his brow, adjust his blanket, perhaps offer a silent word of comfort. She was not a doctor, not a surgeon, but her touch was a balm more potent than any medicine. I watched her from my pallet, a small shivering island in a sea of pain. The heat of my fever was so intense I felt I could see the very atoms of the air shimmering. My head throbbed, a relentless drumbeat against my skull. I was half mad with thirst, my throat a desert. I had been given up for lost, I knew it. The orderlies had simply moved on, believing my time was short. I was a casualty of the fever, not the bullet. The bullet had only opened the door for this insidious, unseen enemy. And then she was there. Her lamp, that steady, unwavering flame, was casting a circle of light around my pallet. I saw her face so close, the lines of concern etched in the soft glow. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, a connection was forged that went beyond words. She saw me, not as a number, not as another dying soldier, but as a man, as Thomas Croft. Her hand, cool and dry, came to rest on my forehead. It was a simple touch, yet it was the most profound sensation I had ever experienced. It was not the cold, professional touch of a doctor, nor the rough, indifferent grasp of an orderly. It was a touch that said, "I see your pain. I understand it, you are not alone." The heat of my fever seemed to recede, if only for a moment, under that gentle pressure. She did not say a word, only looked at me, a silent communion of sorrow and compassion. Then with a soft sigh, she moved on, her lamp a diminishing star in the distance. The fever came roaring back, but something had changed. The darkness was no longer absolute. There was a memory of light, a phantom coolness on my brow that promised a new day, a different kind of hope. Her presence was a revolution. It was not merely that she brought cleanliness, though she did. The floors were scrubbed, the filthy sheets were boiled and replaced. The air, while never fresh, was at least less toxic. It was not merely that she brought order and competence to the chaos, though she did that too. The nurses under her command were stern, efficient, and relentlessly compassionate. They cleaned wounds with a surgeon's precision. They changed dressings with a mother's gentleness. They made sure we were fed and watered. But what she truly brought was something far more intangible and far more vital. She brought back our humanity. In a place designed to strip us of it, She reminded us that we were men, not just broken bodies. The surgeons, the orderlies, the very war itself had treated us as objects. She saw us as people, she spoke to us, not in the patronizing tones of a lady visiting the poor, but with a genuine interest in our stories, our families, our lives before the war. I remember her speaking to a young Irish lad, a private from the Connaught Rangers who had lost a leg at Inkerman. He was distraught, convinced his life was over, that he would be a burden to his family. She knelt beside his cot, her face a study in concentration as he spoke. She listened, truly listened, and when he was finished, she did not offer platitudes. She spoke to him of the new world that lay before him, of opportunities he could seize, of the courage he had shown. It was not empty reassurance. It was a promise of a future, a glimpse of a world beyond this stinking, dying place. The change in the hospital was a slow, agonizing process, like the healing of a deep wound. There were still deaths, of course. The cries in the night did not cease entirely. But now, when a man died, he did not die alone, his last breaths mingling with the indifference of the other men. Now a nurse would be there, holding his hand, offering a prayer, a final touch of human kindness to see him on his way. The dead were no longer merely bodies to be carted away. They were men, their final moments imbued with a dignity they had been denied in life. I watched friends die, men I had shared a campfire with, men I had fought alongside. I saw young Corporal McNiven, the one who had whispered for water, finally find peace. I saw my friend Sergeant Price, his chest a mass of shattered bone and torn flesh from a grape-shot blast, his last moments spent in the gentle presence of one of her nurses. The sorrow was still there, the gaping, hollow ache of loss. But there was also something else, a quiet gratitude that their passing had not been an act of pure despair. My own recovery was a slow, stuttering thing. The fever would ebb and flow, but it never quite took me, and every night I would wait for her. Not with the frantic, desperate hope of a drowning man, but with the quiet, spiritual longing of a pilgrim. The sight of her lamp bobbing in the distance was a reaffirmation of life. It was a promise that kindness, that humanity could not be extinguished. One night she stopped by my pallet again. I was much improved, the fever a ghost of its former self, my wound beginning to knit, though the scar would be a map of the Crimean campaign on my thigh for the rest of my days. I was awake, my mind clear, the rancid air of the hospital no longer a feverish nightmare. I simply looked at her. I had no words to express what I felt, no grand speech to offer. My gratitude was too deep for language. She simply smiled. It was a rare thing, that smile. It did not reach her eyes, which remained heavy with the burden she carried, but it softened the lines on her face and transformed her into something more than a myth. It was a human smile, a tired, knowing expression of shared understanding. She asked me a simple question, a question no one had asked me in months. "Are you feeling better, Private?" "Yes, ma'am," I rasped, my throat still dry from the long siege of fever. "Much better, thank you." She nodded and her gaze swept over me, a silent assessment of my improved condition. She reached out, her fingers just brushing my forehead again, a final ghost-like touch. Then she was gone, her lamp a fading star, her presence a lingering scent of carbolic and cleanliness in a world of decay. I survived Scutari. I was one of the lucky ones, a testament to her work. I was discharged, a medically pensioned veteran with a limp that would be a constant companion. I returned to England to a life that felt both impossibly distant and terrifyingly close to the war I had left behind. The war for me was not a grand campaign of strategy and triumph. It was the taste of stale water on my tongue at Alma. It was the sound of my friend's final gurgling breath at Inkerman. It was the feel of a Russian bullet tearing through my flesh, and it was the smell of Scutari, the endless, suffocating stench of sickness and death. But war was also the quiet glow of a lamp in the darkest of nights. It was the touch of a gentle hand on a fevered brow. It was the silent, unwavering presence of a woman who chose to walk into hell not to make it beautiful, but to make it bearable. Florence Nightingale was not an angel. She was something far more. She was a witness. She saw our suffering, and in that seeing, she gave it a kind of dignity. She did not romanticize our pain. She simply acknowledged it. And in that acknowledgement, she brought us back from the brink of a spiritual abyss. The war, for all its brutality and waste, was not a meaningless horror. Not entirely. Because in the heart of that darkness, in the stinking corridors of Scutari, a woman with a lamp showed us that even in the face of death, kindness can be a light. She gave us back our souls when the war had stolen everything else. And for that, I would have charged up that hill 1,000 times over, just for the chance to see her lamp again. A small, quiet flame in a world of shadows, a reminder that even in hell, there is hope.